This is section 5.1, talking about the cell cycle. So just some things we want you to think about as we move through this section. Just think about how many cells that your body actually has in it, and why does your body need to have a lot of cells? So obviously, some of these answers, there isn't really an exact answer because all of us are different sizes and different shapes, so that's going to vary with how many cells we actually think we have. And then we'll kind of talk about as we go through this why the body would need to have a lot of cells. And then just kind of in a important thing to think about is that each of us began as a single cell, so how did that one cell develop then into this body that we use that has more than 1 trillion cells in it? So lots of cells to think about. So let's start with the basic life of a cell. Most cells in the body are just called somatic cells. And somatic just means general body cells. So maybe write that next to it. General body. All the cells go through something called the cell cycle. And the cell cycle is just a series of stages, and we'll kind of walk through each of those here in just a second. Most of the cell's life, though, is spent in something called interphase. And during interphase, it's growing, it's kind of getting ready to divide, it's replicating its organelles, it's doing just normal life functions. And then a very small portion of its life is actually spent dividing and splitting into two cells. So with cell division, it's also called cell reproduction. This happens in humans and obviously all other organisms. And it kind of depends on what organism it is. That would determine when it's going to be dividing, and also the type of cell would determine how often it's going to divide. So things like skin cells, they're dividing all the time. So basically like every 3 days, where something like a nerve cell may only divide 1 or 2 times its entire life. So it really just kind of depends on what type of cell and how often they're going through this. So in a multi-cell organism like us, this is how we grow. We actually have to increase the number of cells that we have in our body. So starting as 1 cell, making a whole bunch more until we're at the trillions, or over the trillions that we are today. And then throughout our lives, we're constantly replacing the worn out and damaged cells. So cell division has to be happening all the time to kind of replace all of those cells that are just kind of running their life cycle and we need a new one to come in and replace it. So the cell cycle is the period where the cell grows, it gets ready to divide, and then it actually goes through that division. So the growing and getting ready part is called interphase. This is the longest period where a cell is spending its life. And then the actual division takes place in mitosis and cytokinesis. So in mitosis, we're splitting the chromosomes, all the nuclear material. And in cytokinesis, that's where we split the cytoplasm and kind of evenly divide out all those organelles. So starting with interphase, this is the longest one. We actually have 3 stages of interphase. So the first one's called G1, and G1 stands for growth phase 1. And basically the cell is just kind of getting bigger, making sure that it's functioning normally, doing its daily activities. And then at the end of G1, we have something called the checkpoint. We'll talk about that on the next page, but we're basically just going to look things over, make sure everything was done correctly, and then we can move on to the next stage. So the next stage is called the S phase, and the S phase actually stands for synthesis, and what we're synthesizing is new genetic material. So we're actually opening the double helix of DNA, we're copying one side of it, and then we're basically making a whole nother strand off of that copy. So at the end of the S phase, we actually have 2 full sets of genetic material, and then we can move on to G2, and G2 is the second growth phase. This is where we kind of make the cytoplasm bigger, the cell just kind of gets really big and ready to divide into 2. And then at the end of this one, we also have one more checkpoint. If we pass that, we can then go into the cell division. So checkpoints are just there to control the cell cycle, and they make sure that things were done correctly. And your 3 checkpoints, you have one at G1, we just said that. It's going to decide whether it can move on to the next stage, which is the synthesis phase. And then we have one at the end of G2, and at the end of G2, we're actually checking to make sure that that DNA was copied correctly. So if there was any errors along the way, or maybe we accidentally missed a base pair or something like that, and the DNA was made incorrectly, we're not going to let that cell go on and be made incorrectly. So we just really have to check and make sure everything looks good. And then once the cell actually divides and splits into 2, we have one more checkpoint at the end called the M checkpoint. And that's going to make sure that before we finally split the 2 cells apart, we're going to make sure that we're actually going to get both sets of that chromosome material split equally between the two cells. So it says checking for proper attachment in mitosis, meaning we're just making sure that one set of each chromosome is going to be going to each cell. And if we don't pass a checkpoint, we have something called apoptosis. And literally the word pop is right in there. The cell will explode. Okay, it'll pop itself. It's a protein that punctures a hole in the side of the cell, and all the contents from the inside kind of come spilling out. So it is programmed cell death. Lots of cells go through apoptosis. It's a very normal thing that occurs. And it's just our way of making sure that wrongly made cells don't move on, and we don't continue in our body to make the wrong cells. So definitely a good thing that's happening as our body self-checks. And this picture is just showing the different checkpoints. So again, here's G1, kind of a long phase. At the end, there's our checkpoint, and those are some of the things that it's checking for. Synthesis phase is pretty long. And then at the end of G2, we're checking to make sure that that DNA was replicated. The M stage stands for mitosis. That's where we're actually dividing the nuclear material. And we have that checkpoint right there in the middle before we can finally split those cells into two. So 3 checkpoints, 3 stages of interphase, and then they're also showing mitosis in this one as well. This is a cell cycle demo off of the Cells Alive. So if you remember, we did that web quest in the last unit where you looked at the different organelles of the cells. Go ahead and type this web address in, cellsalive.com/cell_cycle.htm. And that will take you to a little example where it'll actually play through the cell cycle, and it'll stop at each of the checkpoints, let you check the cell, make sure that everything was done correctly, and then you can move on to the next stage. So it's just kind of a quick little demo, but it's worth checking out if you have a second. So what can go wrong? If at any point in the cycle the cell starts to malfunction, we basically need to pop the cell. Okay, so if it doesn't pass a checkpoint, it's going to die, or it can go into something called G0. G0 is a permanent resting state. So the cell's still going to function normally. It's still going to do its daily activities and keep doing its job, but it's never going to be allowed to reproduce itself. So we're not going to make a wrong cell from it, but it can still kind of help our body and do its job. Cancer is just a disease that occurs when the cell cycle basically stops being regulated. So what happens is an incorrect cell snuck past that checkpoint. For some reason, our body missed it. We're now making incorrect cells, and they can kind of grow out of control, and then they can start to spread throughout the body. So especially once they hit the bloodstream. So it's basically what cancer is. It's very hard. We don't know, what causes it. Lots of triggers are known to cause cancer, to cause cells to grow uncontrolled. And then also we just don't really have a way to stop it. So definitely scientists are working on this, if we can learn how to control this cell cycle a little bit better, and how to make sure those cells don't get past those checkpoints incorrect, then we would have a cure for cancer. So something they're working on every day. And that's it for this section of notes.